My daughter dragged me this morning to look at the wasp's nest, the hornet's nest. It's a very fine hornet's nest, about as big as a human head, stuck on the back of cabin number 25, with beautiful black hornets in it. So I was sure this must be somehow a text for what I should say. Now the hornets, you know, have a dirty secret, which those bloody scientists have been discovering and have now made a film of, because people with cameras always get in the end. And what the film shows is this, that in the fall, in another, I guess, couple of weeks, 3 weeks, the queens of the year, the queens who've been bred, the young queens who've been bred that year, will fly out from the nest. The whole society will fall to pieces and die off. And the queens will hide in more or less protected places under bark or eaves of houses or whatnot, and will come out in the spring. They will then go and start eating wood to make paper, and with the paper they will build the beginnings of a nest, and in the nest they will lay eggs, one queen per nest, all by herself, and she'll then go off and catch flies and steal bits of ham off your plate and take it to feed the babies, and when those babies grow up they'll be the first line of workers. After which the queen will not leave the nest. She'll just stay there laying eggs. And she will feed by tapping workers on the head somehow with her antennae, which is a signal which makes them regurgitate the flies and ham and whatnot that they've collected, which she will then eat. And they will go off and collect more flies, etc., to feed the babies. As the summer wears on, another line and another line of workers gets bred up, and the senior workers begin to establish a peck order. And this consists in the privilege, perhaps, of tapping junior workers on the head to make them regurgitate food. And about this time of year, the senior workers reach the point at which they tap the babies on the head to make them regurgitate food. At this point, the entire society falls to pieces. the queens go off by themselves for the winter to start again next year. All right, end of first parable. It's a very immoral society, you see. I mean, stealing candy from a child is one of the things we think is really pretty low. And if you do it systematically so that the children really die, that is, of course, the end of society. But the society of these hornets seems to be dependent upon this vice, if it be one. Second text. I've been putting these little pieces together all through this week, and I don't know, they all seem to say the same thing over and over, but I don't think I have any thread for a talk to give you. Only it says the same thing over and over, and this is a very well-known passage of Blake. It's his critique, evaluation, explanation of one of his paintings called The Last Judgment. There is a reproduction of the painting here, but it won't help you much. This is the end of a long essay on that painting. he says, thinking as I do that the creator of this world is a very cruel being, and being a worshipper of Christ, I cannot help saying, the Son, oh how unlike the Father. And then there's a little piece in the margin, apparently, which he says, first God Almighty comes with a thump on the head, then Jesus Christ comes with a balm to heal it. And goes back to the text. The last judgment is an overwhelming of bad art and science. Mental things are alone real. What is called corporeal, nobody knows of its dwelling place. It is in fallacy, and its existence an imposture. Where is the existence out of mind or thought? Where is it but in the mind of a fool? Some people flatter themselves that there will be no last judgment, and that bad art will be adopted and mixed with good art, that error or experiment will make a part of truth, that error or experiment, these apparently being synonyms, will make a part of truth. And they boast that it is its foundation. These people flatter themselves. I will not flatter them. Error is created, truth is eternal. Error or creation will be burned up, and then, and not till then, truth or eternity will appear. It is burned up the moment men cease to behold it. I assert for myself that I do not behold the outward creation. That's the corporeal real. And that to me, it is hindrance and not action. It is as the dirt upon my feet, no part of me. What? It will be questioned. When the sun rises, do you not see a round disk of fire, somewhat like a guinea? Oh, no, no. I see an innumerable company of the heavenly host crying, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. I question not my corporeal or vegetative eye any more than I would question a window concerning a sight. I look through it and not with it. Okay, let me now try to stitch together the final sentence, I look through it and not with it, to the parable of the wasps, and indeed the parable of the seagull's skull, which I handed around yesterday. These are all saying the same thing. To stitch them together, let me use another parable, of the use of a parable. Wendell started conversation yesterday about Odysseus and Penelope and all that. And the group of us were beginning to burrow into a sense of yin and yang, a sense of a universe in which Odysseus and Penelope belonged, or were parables of that universe. And I cut in with Samuel Butler's theory that the Odyssey was written by a charming young woman in Sicily about 200 years later, I think, than is the conventional date, and that one had to consider the yin and yang material as, on the whole, an amused statement by a young woman of the characters and behaviors of these men on their masculine adventures. And then the group stopped burrowing, and the conversation lost its depth, which I think is regrettable. Because it seemed to me, and I didn't really think this out till afterwards, else I would have interfered maybe if I had, I don't know, that the circumstance that yin and yang and the difference between the sexes and the incredible to and fro operations of their mutual amusement, admiration, etc. It seems to me that to try to talk about that without also including the fact of its humorousness was a little sad. Not that to include the humorousness would make it, you know, any less important as a subject of conversation or a subject of inquiry or what have you. The thing is that I made a joke, and the making of a joke, I provided a joke, I didn't make it, Butler made it. The providing of it changed the seriousness of the company, and I don't think it should have, because I think you should have been able to look through that joke, as Blake says you should look through your eyes and not with them, and through the joke see more of the yin-yang, whatever it was we were talking about. Now, if can we say the same about the wasps, the hornets? If we look through the biological parable, example, whatever, of the hornets, what do we see of a world you see, the thing I'm trying to get at is where the intellect, as they call it, comes between, comes between as an obstacle, instead of coming between as a lens, a window, whatever. Now, this seems to be very important for the sort of inquiry that we're trying to engage in. That whenever the intellect comes between as an obstacle, we get caught up. And whenever you don't use it, you talk mush. Therefore, the thing to do is to look through it. Another example. I say to my collected students, called a class, spend 3 or 4 minutes writing a description of that. And they will then write for 3 or 4 minutes, more or less, and then we take a look at their descriptions. And you find at once that there is no consensus about how to describe it. There will be about 25% who say that it looks like a boot. The others, almost invariably, will say that it has parts. What parts they give it will vary totally from individual to individual. There will be people who say it is a broken hexagon with a broken rectangle stuck together, and so on, where the 2 parts are the hexagon and the rectangle. There will be some who take it round the whole outline and say there's a piece of unit length L, and then that breaks off at 120 degrees, and there's another piece at unit length L, and again 120 degrees, and then there's a longer piece, etc., etc., using a sort of Euclidean vocabulary to take each straight line of that outline as a piece. There are people who think it's an outline, and there are people who think it's an area. There are 1 or 2 who are very clever, you know, real scientists in eggs, in embryo. I didn't draw it quite perfectly. It should have been a little more like that, I guess. Who will see that there's a line there which would complete the hexagon. It's supposed to be drawn right properly. It has that line goes clean through this tip to meet down here to complete the hexagon. And if you can make that imaginary line, this fixes some of the proportions, you see. Notice that the parts in general are imaginary. And in order to describe things, we give them parts of which not only the demarcation of the part is imaginary, but the part itself is not complete. There isn't a hexagon there, there isn't a rectangle there. But it's handy to imagine one and then to use that for description. So that what you get is a very funny state of mind in which you discover that all the time you're making up, imagining, creating, if you will, the devices of description, and that these devices commonly are divisions, parts, occasionally are large-scale analogues, like calling it a boot. It's not really like a boot, anyway. We then go on to some other little difficulties of what we mean by saying that there are 50 people in the room. Are these parts of a Lindisfarne conference, or what are they? Are they separate? How separate? What do you mean separate? What do you mean they're not quite separate? You arrive at a conclusion that, in fact, they are sort of nodes ganglia, which is perhaps the word, in a communications net in which there are more pathways of the net meeting inside each of those globs of protoplasm, than there are pathways between them. And from the density, there are lots of neural pathways inside here, chemical, other pathways, rather fewer between me and you. To this extent, I might be able to say that I'm a separate organism or a separate ganglion in this whole business. But that's about all we mean when we say they're separate people. And obviously they are unseparate to the extent they are tangled together. And this whole ganglion of ganglions is to some extent unseparate, insofar as we had the New York Times yesterday and shall go out tomorrow or the day after, gossiping about all this to the rest of the world. So, what I say to my class is, look at that thing on the... By the way, very few people mention the blackboard in describing it, and very few mention the chalk. I carefully give them the instructions to describe that, leaving the pronoun that without a defined antecedent except ostensibly pointing in the direction of the blackboard. Nobody yet has thought of describing it as having been made in the order in which I drew the lines. I always draw them in the same order. That is, nobody puts any time into their description. That's something we don't do in this culture if we can help it. The fact that it's a pathway, except for people who go all the way around it, and they go all the way around it consecutively. I did not go all the way around it when I drew it, you will notice. How many people know the order in which I did draw the lines? Mostly not. In general, you were, that is, blocked by the figure from recording the order, right? The figure got the quote figure. What? Oh, you couldn't see through me. Oh, I'm sorry. That would account for that. Yeah, perhaps that's always why they don't.
You know a lot about classrooms. None of them have ever told you.
That's right. That too says something about a classroom. Yeah. So that if we look through this whole story, we begin to find out a lot of interesting things. You see, the illusion is that the object to be described and the description as a product are what science is about. This is not so. What science is about is looking through the techniques of description and through the object described. It's and through the object described that is the trick, to something lying behind. And that's where we keep, in a sense, funking the what should I say? The identity of ourselves in the whole business. It's when you look through the pathway of description and the object to what lies beyond that, that you meet yourself again. The gull skull. If you look at it, it's beautiful, elegant, sure. If you look at the fact that it's elegant and it's elegant, then you get your next step. And there you are meeting yourself, you see. Because you too are a biological object, essentially created or grown, begotten, not made, in the image of the gull skull, or the gull skull in your image. I worked the thing up another way with the image of the moire patterns, in which you go around the world, and we all do, with patterns in our heads, mostly unconscious, and we understand the world we meet by projecting it onto them and thereby creating essentially other sorts of patterns. We had a very cute apparatus in Hawaii which was being worked up, which was to be a helmet to be worn by a blind man to give him sonar. We were sort of in the sonar business working with porpoises, and there were all sorts of notions that the sonar of the porpoises might give us new inventions, because that was the way they wanted to look through that lens, not other ways through it. Sonar is a nice thing to look through anyway, in terms of this. Look through your eyes, not with them. The thing goes like this. To get decent imaging with sound instead of light, you require very much shorter wavelengths, very much higher frequencies of sound than sound, the audible sound, will provide. If the waves are far apart, as they are in audible sound, the images won't focus, they fuzz out. But if you could reduce the wavelength of sound, increasing its frequency, pushing it up, 4 or 5 octaves, you'd get quite nice images. Now, this would seem to be what a porpoise uses. And the problem is, how can you make high frequencies audible to the human ear? Well, you do this by the method of moire, by interference patterns. You have a helmet which emits a very high frequency beam. Right, this beam is bounced back by things out in the world, quote, and is picked up by a receiving apparatus which plays a different frequency within reasonable range of the frequency that is being, you see, so that you get a beat formation which is much slower than the high frequency that went out and comes back. It comes back and creates beats with a second generation of sound in your head. And those beats are of low enough frequency for you to hear them. Lovely. Now, in order to get a distance phenomenon on it, what they did was to make the beat generator, the receiving sound, follow a zigzag sawtooth graph of frequency, so that the further away it is, it comes in to meet a different level of the sawtooth. So that you generate, the helmet generates patterns itself against which the ecosystem can create a third pattern, which is one you hear. It's exactly the same sort of thing I was talking about. But notice this is a little more explicit in that what I should call the receiving pattern is very specifically and definitely the creation of the receiver. And you can look through, you see. First, you look as the blind man is expected to look, to use the information of the echo, etc., etc. But second, you can look through this whole parable and see in this parable the analogue of how we live, and in some degree what it is to live. This is what I mean by looking through not only looking through the sense organ, but looking through the fact of the sense organ to what it's all about. Now, when you start doing that, now it's an interesting exercise, by the way, in passing, let us say, to do it for concepts like power, dependency, spectatorship, admiration, that sort of thing. Right. When you start doing that, because we're not quite ready to go on to such difficult things to look at, when you start doing that, you get at once the possibility of changing your receiver apparatus as a result of your experience. Blake says you should look through your eye I question not my corporeal or vegetative eye any more than I would question a window concerning a sight. I look through it and not with it. Now, of course, you know, really life isn't like that. Blake couldn't ever do that. And he couldn't do it because his eye is constructed to do better than a camera. If you, let us say, are looking at a white screen with a fine line drawn on it, that image is projected onto your retina And there's the fine line, inverted, crisscrossed, inverted. And the end organs who are tickled by the line, or no, the ones who are not tickled by the line, because it's a black line, and those in the neighborhood which are so related to each other that they react upon each other and increase the contrast between where the line is and where the line is not. You're looking through a system which will, in photographic terms, increase the gamma of your image and will impose some degree of outline where previously there was only a contact between different areas. And this, you see, is a response to the reception at the moment. And you can say that your eye, quote, knows that this is the thing to do. And you do, in fact, benefit by the fact that your eye does it. It gives you clearer, sharper information. But it is, of course, a falsification of the information. And no doubt illusions and so on can be based upon that to the point of deceiving you. You know, it's like, I was in OSS during the war, and one of the things one was very conscious of was that intelligence is always falsified at every echelon level of a big organization. This is an intelligence organization. But as the intelligence goes up, is summarized, as it's called, digested, and the act of digesting it for the next busier executive, next way up the step, is always an increase of contrast and a throwing away of detail and a falsification, for which there are certain advantages, you know. But it means that up at the top, they get a very distorted philosophy of the world, really. So Blake couldn't really do this because his eye is not a window. A window is more or less inactive. Puts some dirt between you and the universe, but that's about all it does. It doesn't modify how it treats the information according to the information as it comes. It itself is not a mind. A window is not. Whereas an eye has a good deal of mental function already at the level of the eye. And this is part of what it is to be alive. So, we get, as we look through the fact of our sense organs, we begin to get a breakdown of the relationship between us and the universe outside, which has a sort of levels, hierarchic sort of shape. There is, you see, the simple notion of increasing contrast. That can be imposed between us and the universe and can be part of, therefore, the universe, which is us-universe. But it could be more complicated than that. We could be especially alert to various sorts of things and various sorts of patterns, and change the patterns to which we are alert. I used to be an entomologist when I was a little boy. And in those days I was very sensitive. I couldn't look at a tree trunk which had a moth on it and not see the moth. Now I think I only see about one moth in 10, probably. Most of you probably see about one moth in 100. But you can, become sensitive, and very curiously sensitive, because moths are different, one from another, species from species, very different indeed in their forms. And what you have become sensitive to, if you train to see the moths on tree trunks, is not to particular form, but to, well, for example, anything which has a bilateral symmetry. On the tree trunk there is a lot of irregular modeling of bark, of lichen, of this and that, moss, bits of dirt, bird's dung, such things. And if you are trained to see these things, what you are looking for is either an irregularity which doesn't fit the system of irregularity. I mean, the bark is pretty irregular, yes? But the cracks in bark are not really irregular. They're correlated with each other, partially irregular. And you see an edge that couldn't be a bark edge, and therefore must be a moth edge, and then you see the rest of the moth, is roughly how it goes. Or you see a bit of bilateral symmetry in the bark, and you don't expect that. That shouldn't be there, except by improbable accident. So you look again, and, well, that's a moth, of course. A stick insect looks terribly like a stick, but when it's standing on the privet, whatever it's eating, it will usually stand in a position which no twig would stand. It's across the twigs instead of properly branched off from a twig. And you see that break in pattern. And you look again and you see, well, that's the stick insect, yeah. All right, but now all that is learnable, you see, and that is what I was talking about with the moire patterns that you carry in your head, ready for something to agree with them or disagree with them. And you can learn these things, and you learn to learn them. So that now you see I'm building up as I look through the intellect, using the fact of the intellect as my information about me and the world. I begin to get a very large how should I say? I just don't use the word pattern again, partly because we think of patterns as having beginnings and endings. And as the stuff gets bigger, the edges, the frames, sort of disappear. You see, what shape is a tree? Yeah, I know a system of shapes which could be oak trees. I know a system of shapes which could be spruces, a system of shapes that could be pines. But if you ask me what shape is a tree, yeah, but these are systems of shapes. And that's a very small part of the universe that already, you know, is building up. And if you get, ask me what shape is the waterfront of a bay, or the waterfront of a, if we take this waterfront here under the Lindisfarne, you've got the oak woods coming down, and within 20 or 30 feet, a total reorganization of the vegetation down to the tidal flat, where of course you've now got a saltwater vegetation of little algae and a few shrimps and things, and the pretty little jellyfish tenaphors that the children found that night. But that, you see, is itself a pattern sequence, a pattern of patterns all fitting together, which I can be conscious of because I am a pattern of patterns fitted together. I receive it onto a pattern of patterns. Right. Now you see we're on the edge from which we can start to talk about aesthetics, or we could start to talk about politics, or we could start to talk about almost anything you like. Always provided we can hold the large receiver onto which we want to build out, or onto which we receive and look through at whatever the politics is, the love, the hate, the interaction, the dependency, the child rearing, the educational theories, what have you. The aesthetic side, just touch that first, sort of as drill. The primrose on the river's brim, how's it go? A primrose by a river's brim, a yellow primrose was to him, and it was nothing more. Wordsworth's comment on a gentleman named Bell, is that right? I don't know who Bell was, do you know? In any case, Bell, you see, I guess really took Blake's advice. He looked totally through his eyes, and he saw a yellow primrose on the river's, by the river's brim. A yellow primrose was to him, and it was nothing more. That is, he did not stand off from the whole business or be touched by the whole business, in which the primrose resonates. What? Resonates the biological total patterning and dynamics of the man looking at the primrose. At which point, the primrose is something very much more than a primrose, because it is the man's reminder of the nature of life, really. Remember, I passed around the gull skull with a message that it is a reminder not of death, but of life and its complexities. Because you're all seagull skulls too, and so am I, in certain ways. that really built up originally, that's a set of ideas about aesthetics, during an LSD experience. I went into the LSD experience to try to think about aesthetic determination of behavior and such things. My bear leader, who was a psychologist, I was a member of a sample for him, not even a primrose. And he'd scolded me like anything. He said, "You think too much, Gregory. Stop thinking. Relax and enjoy it." And indeed, he went out into the garden and got a rosebud. And said, "Well, now stop thinking. Take a look at that." I took a look at it. It was a beautiful rosebud, and undoubtedly improved by LSD. And I said, "Yes, Joe. Think what a lot of thought went into that." That is, I was in a state of, quote, altered consciousness, whatever you want to call it, in which this sort of idea, be an idea, feeling, be a feeling, was very accessible. And I'd already, begun to think of evolution as a thought process, as a mental process of some kind. And think of all the evolution that went into the rosebud, and so on, the symmetry and repetition of parts and rhythms and all the rest of it. So when I finally escaped from my bear leader, I lay down and began to think seriously about this whole aesthetic matter. And it went somewhat like this, that if you want to think about the beautiful, the sensible thing is not to think about landscapes or found objects or works of art, all of which are sort of second-order derivative phenomena. What you have to think about is conspecific bodies of the opposite sex. Why on earth should these be, quote, beautiful? Is it so for all species? Things of this kind. And bodies are very peculiar things. We'd been listening, incidentally, to Goldberg variations while I was on the microscope stage of the psychologist. And from Goldberg's variations and Bach and such things, it was a very natural step to the rhythms of a body. The body, after all, is a segmented object. If you look at the spine, where its archaic form is sort of visible most, you will see, 7 cervical vertebrae and 11 thoracic, how many lumbar, how many sacral, etc. And all these, down this series of vertebrae down the spinal column, each one is a modulation, in a sense, of the previous one. But then the cervical series, the thoracic series, is a modulation of the cervical, etc. And the whole thing is modulated upon a hypothetical archetype of a vertebra, which isn't present at all, you know. Is that an archetype? Is that what they mean? Not being present at all. Not being present at all. The primitive, yeah. And that this modulation of modulation, within the hierarchy of modulation, more and more abstract, to the point at which your mind starts to boggle very quickly, you know, because you can't really conceptualize the thing anymore, and you have to throw away the intellect in the narrower sense of the word and get a feeling of a deeper kind. Also intellectual, but deeper, I guess. And this seems to be what happens with music. Music, for me, so rapidly becomes more complex than I can think about, that I get a lot of fun sooner and lose my way sooner than most people, I guess. And then I went on with this line of thought to get the idea that I could only appreciate, quote, beauty, the beautiful, by virtue of the fact that I am a segmented rhythmic object, related in certain ways to the segmentation and rhythms of that which I appreciate. Again, you see the moire pattern notion. The receiving pattern has to be in some way related to the pattern which is coming in. Yeah, then there's another thought that's been in my mind right through this whole business, and I'm nearly ready to talk about religion and power and all those things. And that is that the human species, in both sexes really, tends to be what the biologists call neotenic. That is, the creature achieves effective, especially reproductive maturity before it's grown up. The classical biological example of this is the axolotl. The axolotl is a sort of newt, an amphibian, who lives in the water in, I think, Mexico. Most animals that end in TL live in Mexico. You know, like quackiotle. No, that's not one. What's that god you're so fond of? Yeah, Quetzalcoatl. And he's really only a tadpole. That is, he's got external gills hanging out from his neck, and it never leaves the water, but he becomes sexually mature while still a tadpole, and breeds as a tadpole, and indeed in nature adult axolotls never occur. In zoology labs they can be fed pituitary and will then mature, lose their gills and become land-going newts. But this doesn't happen in nature. They have, so to speak, forgotten how to mature. Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm getting onto that, you see. Now, the human anatomy, all primate anatomy, monkeys, apes, and things, is pretty primitive. I mean, a porpoise is a much more specialized creature than a monkey. This may be handy, but it's sort of primitive. And well, another example is the example of the domestic dog. The domestic dog is believed to be in its behavior neotenic as compared with the wolf from which it probably came. That is, it goes on playing all its life. Wild animals in general, with the exception of the otter, do not play after maturity much. A little bit of sort of being played with by the pups when they come up, by the kittens and so on, but not real games. They become xenophobic as they grow up. Wolves become xenophobic, but dogs can learn new things. Wolves become rigid much quicker than dogs. And the freedom to learn is something that is characteristic of juvenile animals. And human beings, you know, even at my age, still learn things in some degree. We also have the unfortunate characteristic, you see, of loving bang, bang, bang toys, even after we've stopped being 8-year-old little boys, and we go on elaborating bang, bang, bang toys into our grown-up age. And a part of our view of the world as we look through ourselves has to be the conclusion that it is a little odd never to grow up. It admits all sorts of things which otherwise would be indigestible. In a sense, you see, the main point of sense organs, of brains, of limited moire patterns for receiving information and all that, a very important part of that is to keep out most of the world. It's like your stomach. You eat stuff, and most of it, if it got direct into your bloodstream, would be almost immediately poisonous. But in your stomach, it is broken down into smaller molecules, which are sort of non-specific, don't have but they are not allergens, as more complicated molecules would be, and you can tolerate them. And the process of digestion, which we think of as assimilating, is also a protective process of xenophobia. It's keeping out foreign combinations that you don't want to have inside. Now, this is also true of most of your mental process. It's concerned with keeping out foreign combinations that you really don't want to have inside. It becomes, you see, increasingly difficult to become schizophrenic in any sort of positive way as you get older. There probably were quite good reasons why it was called dementia precox, the dementia of the young, the precocious dementia. In a sense, we've all swallowed an awful lot of stuff already and therefore are pretty nutty. But you see, if you're a little more rigid, you can keep out the grosser contradictions and tangles. You have learned a way of assimilating life, and you're going to go on assimilating it that way. But no, you see, the human species is also neotenic and keeps this learning channel open and can receive the experience of having the rug pulled from under in a way that it really couldn't if it were a more rigid creature. But then, having the rug pulled from under is still very traumatic. It's rigid enough so it's still traumatic. All right, now we cut in at a very much more sophisticated and elaborate level. I've been giving you sort of axioms and fundamentals. Then now you want to know about power. Power is a very peculiar concept. You say to your psychologist, your therapist, that you are able to use a typewriter and you can do this very well and skillfully. You think you can get a job because your aunt taught you. She was always so strict. And when you start to talk about your aunt taught you, your psychiatrist will perk up his ears and will start to listen. He's not interested in your being able to use a typewriter. Has certain pragmatic use. He can send you out into the world, you'll get a job. But the moment you start to talk about your aunt teaching you, your psychiatrist will start to notice, and he'll hope you go on with the conversation, saying, she always punished me when I was wrong, or she always encouraged me when I was right, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, so that you get a picture of a learning context that the person went through. And the contexts of your learning, insofar as you swallowed them, assimilated them, and thought that life will contain contexts like that, that's what life is made of. This is the general psychoanalytic theory of childhood, that you learn about contexts in dealing with parents who do certain sorts of things in certain sorts of silly ways, or wise ways, even. Right. And it is this that we have to talk about, the patterns of this. And if you are using words like power, this is the sort of thing you're talking about. First of all, remember that we're talking natural history. We are saying, what do people in 1976 in the eastern United States middle and professional classes, what sort of patterns are they walking around the world in their heads through which they look at the world and see what it is? And we have to know that as a natural history fact. Then we have to know what really goes on and other possible ways of thinking about this in order to look through the fantastic experience of meeting one's fellow middle-class creatures and their ideas, and looking right through that experience to understand something about it all. All right. It is a characteristic of these people that they, quote, use metaphors, and these things are by and large metaphoric, which they derive from physics labs and not from psych labs. It's bad enough to derive your metaphors from psych labs. It's worse if you derive them from physics labs. Now, the physics labs derive their metaphor diminishingly today, but very seriously 30 years ago. And the middle classes are still at least 30 years behind in their physics, if not further. So that you get a mass of words like energy, power, tension, inertia is an idea even. But you can think of them. And if you look around, you'll find people using them all the time. These are essentially quantitative ideas. Quantities. Energy, you see, is a quantity of dimensions, mass, times velocity squared. Power is a quantity of work per second, etc. And these quantities become the metaphors for talking about these patterns. A most regrettable arrangement. But that is so. So that in the notion of power, you're going to have these quantitative things lying behind, and you've got to strip that off if you're going to talk about the natural history of human beings engaged in power play. And you'd better throw away the word power anyway, because it keeps pulling in these quite irrelevant and unsuitable quantities. Okay. So that power now refers to patterns of ideas, not to forces. That's another word they love. Historic forces. What are historic forces? God alone knows. All right. You are caught in concepts like power, partly because of this, you see. Now, you strip that away, we now say, well, what we really are talking about is assumptions that the sequence of experience in the world will contain if-then relations of a certain particular kind. And usually, when they use the power metaphors, they mean a punishment here, a negative reinforcement of some kind, if something or other, or they mean a positive reinforcement if I have power. How should we say this? Wait, A has power over B if A is setting the contingencies of negative reinforcement for B. That seems to be roughly what is meant. There are some more complicated arrangements of this, where A has power over B by controlling information supplies, bottlenecks of information, and things of this kind, or even distorting the information. That's a handy way to influence B. Propagandic methods and so forth. Or if you can make B sufficiently muddle-headed by serving him second-rate entertainment in large quantities, this gives you a certain sort of power. But you know, we're not talking about power at all. We're still talking about psychological patterns and their manipulation and coexistence. It begins to get very complicated when you discover that, say, in the realm of aggression, and the concept of aggression lies, you know, tied up with the concept of power, you find that you've got total reversals of species, which have been totally hidden by this sort of metaphor that conceals everything. Suppose we keep it at the very simple level of physical strength. And we've got an A versus B situation of physical strength. And these creatures have in their heads, in their antennae, their perception machinery, they have all sorts of patterns of this general kind. Deutero patterns, we call them. Like spectatorship, dependency, succoring, pity, compassion, envy. All these words, you know, they're statements about sequences of context between persons. They're not a something, a principle inside. They're a pattern of a dance. Envy is the pattern of a dance. Generosity is the pattern of a dance, involving, hypothetically at least, in the imagination at least, two persons, usually two persons in the real world, often more than two. Now, all those things, you see, they're not real inside. They're only real inside if you're still carrying these funny physical sort of things in your head, which is still nonsense. All right. What do we mean by an aggression A versus B? Well, if you look at lions, you will find that there are two sorts of aggression among the lions. This is Konrad Lorenz's thing. There is aggression which the lion shows to a zebra whom he is going to eat. In this case, the lion makes himself as small as possible, gets as close as he thinks he can, and then suddenly charges. And with reasonable luck, he fells that zebra, and the zebra is dead within a few seconds. This is routine. He has to do this once a week or so, you know, and that's it. He doesn't risk a wound. No sensible predator will risk a wound because he won't be able to get his dinner next week if he does, if he gets wounded. And he makes himself as small as possible and then goes in with a smack. As between two lions, rivalry for territory or sex or whatever it is, he makes himself as large as possible, makes an awful lot of noise. It's primarily a moral operation and not necessarily a physical one. And again, he doesn't want to be wounded, of course, because his limbs are very precious. There's no hospital for him. And nobody will provide for him if he's maimed. So, what you get is a violent explosion of exhibitionism between the two animals, And with reasonable luck, one will retreat. And there ain't going to be no war. Yes? If they must, then they will still fight, but they will fight always magnifying their threat along with magnifying the fight. And these two pictures are almost exact inverses of each other. And the point is this, that vis-a-vis the prey, the stimulus, let's say the fighting act, is in some sense a function of the weakness of the other, yes? That zebra is undefended, I'll get him. And I will try to increase his weakness by stalking him, and by surprise, and by all sorts of things. Now, in the other case, which is a symmetrical battle, you see this is weakness sort of fits with strength as its opposite, its complement. And in the other case, you've got a symmetrical thing, and the more the other lion shows off, the more I show off. We get like the two dictators on the barber's chairs, the Charlie Chaplin movie, in which as each one moves up, the other one has to move up louder, higher, bigger, and you get what do they call it, a Pontiac. I'll get the next sort of car, I don't know what that would be, a Cadillac or something, keeping up with the Joneses. And you know, we better get better missiles because we've got a missile gap, was the phrase. So that the fighting or armamenting, preparing thing becomes now a function not of weakness, that is A minus B, the amount B is behind, but a function of the amount B is the fighting of A. Again, the fighting of A depends upon the amount B is ahead. B is a threat by being ahead or threatening to become ahead, and at this point we get the thing. Now these are virtually opposite patterns, psychologies, contextual structures, opposites in pattern at this sort of level, you see. And you're going to get that behind your concepts of power, your concepts of aggression, and so forth. And it isn't till you sort of see through that whole thing, or at the moment when you begin to see through that whole thing and its contrasting alternative patterns, that you get to a point at which you can sort of belong in the world, I guess, and not be simply responding to the immediate context as you are hypnotized into seeing it. That is, I'm saying that most of our social action is under a sort of hypnosis of a set of designs of this order of abstraction. Patterns at that order. And that the possibility is of seeing, in a sense, through those, to realizing that you're in those, in which case, if you want to get into another, you can, and you might. Or if you want to get out of one, you conceivably can. A story which some of you will have heard, of a Japanese girl whom I visited, I interviewed during the war, on respect in the Japanese family. And she gave me beautiful detail, about half an hour, what happens when father comes home from work, who opens the door to him, and who sits where at a meal, and who passes what, and how do you ask, and so on, so on, so on. And then suddenly said, but in Japan we do not respect the father. And I said, wait a minute, what have you been telling me? Oh, you see, we practice respect to the father. And I said, why do you do that? I didn't know what to say. And she said, in case we would need to respect somebody. And then you think, you know, of thousands of GI marriages to little Japanese girls. And the little Japanese girls have given the GI the products of drilled respect. But that isn't it. It took me a very long time to think that story through to what it's really about. And one of the keys is that Occidentals laugh when they hear that story. What are they laughing at? And actually, that interview occurred in 42, I guess, and I didn't get the final clue to it really till about a year ago. I was talking in Rochester. And there in the class, anthropology class I was talking in, was a little Japanese girl, and I could see her out of the corner of my eye, holding on to the corner of her chair, and not knowing whether she was going to be laughed at or not. Which incidentally indicated to me that the story was a very important story anyway. And I knew that before I came to the end of the story, I had to know what the answer was. And it came. By the grace of God, sometimes it does. The answer is that Occidentals, when they acquire a skill, they think of practice as something with which you acquire a skill. And a skill is essentially a tool. That is, you use your skill, but you yourself are unchanged. I, Gregory, will learn the skill of using a saw, and after that I can saw wood better than I could before, but it's the same old Gregory. It's still me. An Oriental acquires a skill, well, an Oriental engages in practice in order to change something which for the moment we'll call a self, to come out of the practice a different sort of person. A person, in this case, capable of respect, of respecting. But the notion is that the discipline of the practice will, in a sense, be more important than that which is learned. You practice not in order to get this better, but in order to get this better, of some particular kind. You engage in archery, not in order to be able to shoot somebody with a bow and arrow, to God's sake, which nobody wants to do anyway. There are better ways. But you practice archery in Zen in order to become a different sort of human being, in a sense. And that's what she's talking about. Now, you see, when you've reached that point, you're on the edge of being able to say, I am selective of my character. Not of what my character will be today. That I cannot do anything about. But of what my character will be like 6 years hence. if I engage in these disciplines over whatever the time required may be. And you can't tell what the time is going to be, you know. See, one of the things that's been in the background of our discussion the last week has been the nature of free will, which nobody was stupid enough to stick their neck out about, but it's there. Now, free will has this funny sort of thing that if you think of acting, or learning at the proto-level, or learning at the next level up, or learning about the next level up, you are the deterministic object, the slave, of the lowest level that you cannot control. Now, if you cannot control learning at all, you are the slave of your reflexes. If you can in fact modify your reflexes, you are the slave of at that. You have that much more free will, quote, but you're still limited by your ability to modify them. If you can change your ability to modify them, then you get another dimension of freedom. We do not know whether that ladder of dimensions is finite or infinite. That is not given us to know, as far as I know. It certainly doesn't have many rungs in it. Pretty soon you run out of ability to learn, whatever you want to call it. But there is a sort of a freedom, and this is what people who cultivate disciplines and so forth are after. There is a sort of a freedom to choose not what you will be like today, but what you will be like 6 months hence, or 6 years hence, whatever it is.